Maria Santos stood barely 5 feet tall in her worn sneakers, clutching a crumpled acceptance letter from the Army recruitment office. The other recruits towered over her as she waited in line at Fort Benning, Georgia. At 19, she looked more like a college freshman than someone preparing for military service. Her thick-rimmed glasses kept sliding down her nose, and she nervously adjusted the oversized jacket her mother had insisted she wear. The drill sergeant's voice boomed across the courtyard as he sized up the new arrivals. When his eyes landed on Maria, his expression said everything. She was the daughter of Mexican immigrants who ran a small grocery store in East Los Angeles. Her father had worked double shifts to support the family, while her mother cleaned office buildings at night. Maria had always been the quiet one, buried in books, dreaming of becoming a teacher someday. But college was expensive, and her family needed help. The Army recruiter had painted a picture of education benefits, steady pay, and a chance to serve her country. What he hadn't mentioned was how different she would be from everyone else. The other recruits seemed confident, athletic, ready for anything. Maria felt like she was playing dress-up in someone else's uniform. During the first week of basic training, Maria struggled with everything. She couldn't do a single pull-up while her bunkmate knocked out 15. Her marksmanship scores were among the lowest in her unit. When they ran the obstacle course, she finished dead last, gasping for breath while others looked barely winded. The drill instructors noticed, and their comments were not kind. "Santos, you sure you're in the right place?" Sergeant Mills would ask during formation. "Maybe you should be home helping Mama with the dishes instead of playing soldier." The other recruits would snicker, and Maria's cheeks would burn with embarrassment. She started skipping meals, spending extra time at the shooting range, doing push-ups in the bathroom when everyone else was sleeping. Her bunkmate, Jessica Chen, was everything Maria wasn't. Tall, confident, and naturally athletic, Jessica had played college basketball before enlisting. At first, she barely acknowledged Maria's existence. But one night, she found Maria crying quietly into her pillow after a particularly brutal day of training. "You know," Jessica whispered, "my grandmother was about your size when she fled China during the war. She carried my grandfather on her back for 3 days when he got shot by Japanese soldiers. Size isn't everything." Maria looked up, surprised by the kindness in Jessica's voice. "The thing is, you keep showing up. That counts for something." The turning point came during week 6. The unit was practicing urban warfare tactics in a mock village when everything went wrong. A training exercise with smoke grenades turned dangerous when a faulty device created real flames. Several recruits were trapped in a building as smoke filled the corridors and panic set in. Maria was positioned outside as a spotter when she saw the smoke pouring from the second-floor windows. Without thinking, she dropped her radio and ran toward the building. Her small size, which had been such a disadvantage, suddenly became an asset. While larger recruits struggled through narrow windows and tight spaces, Maria moved like water through the obstacles. She found 2 recruits unconscious from smoke inhalation in a back room. One was Jessica. Maria couldn't carry them both, but she could drag them one at a time to a window where other soldiers could help pull them to safety. Her lungs burned, and her eyes streamed tears, but she kept moving. When the fire department arrived, they found Maria performing CPR on Jessica in the courtyard, her uniform singed and her face covered in soot. The incident changed everything. Word spread quickly through the base about the tiny recruit who had risked her life to save her fellow soldiers. Suddenly, the same drill instructors who had mocked her were looking at her differently. Sergeant Mills pulled her aside after the incident. "Santos," he said, his voice unusually gentle, "I owe you an apology. I've been in the Army for 15 years and I've seen a lot of soldiers come and go. Some look the part but crumble when it matters. Others surprise you. You've got something that can't be taught in basic training. You've got heart." Maria's confidence began to grow. She still struggled with some physical challenges, but she found ways to compensate. She became the best shot in her unit by studying trajectory and wind patterns, while others relied on natural ability. She memorized military manuals and tactical procedures until she could recite them in her sleep. Most importantly, she earned the respect of her fellow soldiers. Jessica recovered fully from her smoke inhalation and became Maria's closest friend and training partner. Together, they pushed each other to excel. Jessica helped Maria with physical training, while Maria tutored Jessica in military theory and strategy. They made an unlikely but effective team. By graduation day, Maria had transformed. She still looked young and small in her dress uniform, but there was steel in her eyes that hadn't been there 12 weeks earlier. Her parents drove from Los Angeles to attend the ceremony, her father taking his first day off work in years. When Maria's name was called for an achievement award in leadership and courage, her mother wept openly in the stands. Standing at attention as the American flag was raised, Maria thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had joined the Army looking for a way to pay for college and help her family. She hadn't expected to discover that she was capable of things she never imagined. The shy bookworm from East LA was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As the ceremony concluded and families rushed to embrace their newly minted soldiers, Maria felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Sergeant Mills wearing a rare smile. "Santos," he said, "I don't know where the Army is sending you next, but I have a feeling you're going to make us all proud. You've got the heart of a warrior, and that's something special." Maria smiled back, standing a little taller in her uniform. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face it head-on. The girl, who had seemed so inexperienced just 3 months ago, was about to begin a journey that would take her places she never dreamed possible. 6 months after graduation, Private First Class Maria Santos found herself stepping off a military transport plane into the scorching heat of Afghanistan. The sun beat down mercilessly on Bagram Airfield as she shouldered her heavy pack and looked around at the foreign landscape. Mountains rose in the distance like jagged teeth against a cloudless sky, and the air tasted of dust and diesel fuel. Her assignment was to Forward Operating Base Falcon, a remote outpost in the Kandahar province. The base housed about 200 soldiers whose job was to patrol the surrounding villages and maintain security in an area known for frequent Taliban activity. As the newest arrival, Maria drew curious stares from seasoned soldiers who had been in country for months or even years. Captain Robert Hayes, the commanding officer, was a career military man with gray at his temples and tired eyes that had seen too much. When Maria reported for duty, he looked her up and down with the same skepticism she had faced in basic training. "Santos, right?" he said, consulting her file. "Fresh out of training. Well, this isn't Georgia, soldier. Out here, mistakes get people killed. You stick close to the experienced guys and keep your mouth shut until you learn how things work." Maria was assigned to Squad Charlie under Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez, a tough but fair leader from Texas, who had already completed 2 deployments. The other members of her squad were a mix of seasoned veterans and soldiers on their first tour. There was Corporal Mike Thompson, a mechanic from Detroit who could fix anything with an engine, and Specialist Tony Williams, a former college football player whose size made him perfect for carrying the squad's heavy weapons. Her first few weeks were an adjustment period filled with learning the rhythms of deployment life. Wake-up calls came before dawn, followed by equipment checks, briefings, and patrols that could last anywhere from a few hours to several days. The heat was oppressive, the food was barely edible, and the constant awareness that danger could come from anywhere was exhausting. Maria's first real test came during a routine patrol through the village of Kala-i-Nao. Intelligence reports suggested Taliban fighters were using the village as a staging area for attacks on coalition forces. Squad Charlie's mission was to search for weapons caches and gather information from local residents. The village was a collection of mud brick buildings, connected by narrow alleyways that provided perfect hiding spots for snipers or improvised explosive devices. Children watched from doorways as the American soldiers moved through the streets, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and fear that Maria found heartbreaking. Everything seemed normal until they reached the village center. Maria was providing rear security when she noticed something the others had missed. A small wire, barely visible, running along the base of a wall they were about to pass. Her training kicked in, and she raised her hand to signal the squad to stop. "Wire!" she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Possible IED." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez immediately called for the explosive ordnance disposal team while the squad established a security perimeter. The bomb disposal experts confirmed Maria's suspicion. A roadside bomb powerful enough to kill or maim several soldiers had been hidden in the wall. Her sharp eyes had potentially saved lives on her first real patrol. "Good catch, Santos," Rodriguez said later as they prepared to return to base. "That's the kind of attention to detail that keeps people alive out here." The other squad members looked at her with new respect, and Maria felt the same sense of acceptance she had experienced after the training accident back at Fort Benning. As weeks turned into months, Maria proved herself time and again. Her small size allowed her to move through tight spaces during building searches, and her keen observation skills made her invaluable during patrols. She had an almost supernatural ability to spot things that didn't belong: a disturbed patch of earth that might hide an explosive device, a window shade that hung differently than it had the day before, a local who avoided eye contact in a way that suggested guilty knowledge. But Afghanistan was teaching her harsh lessons about the cost of war. During a patrol in October, Squad Charlie was providing security for a convoy of supply trucks when they were ambushed by Taliban fighters. The attack came from multiple directions, with rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapon fire turning a routine mission into a deadly firefight. Maria found herself crouched behind a disabled truck, returning fire while trying to spot the enemy positions. The sound of bullets passing overhead was like angry hornets, and the smell of gunpowder and burning rubber filled her nostrils. This was nothing like the controlled exercises she had practiced during training. Corporal Thompson was hit in the first minutes of the fight, a bullet catching him in the shoulder and spinning him around like a rag doll. Maria could see him trying to apply pressure to the wound while staying low behind cover. Without thinking, she sprinted across 20 yards of open ground to reach him, bullets kicking up dust around her feet. She dragged Thompson to better cover behind a concrete barrier and began treating his wound with the medical supplies from her pack. Her hands shook as she worked, but her training took over. She applied a pressure bandage and gave him morphine for the pain while continuing to scan for threats. "You're going to be okay," she told Thompson, her voice calmer than she felt. "Just stay with me." Thompson managed a weak smile and nodded, gripping his rifle with his good hand. The firefight lasted 45 minutes before air support arrived and drove off the attackers. When the dust settled, Squad Charlie had suffered 3 wounded but no killed in action, thanks in part to Maria's quick medical response. As Thompson was loaded onto a medical evacuation helicopter, he grabbed Maria's hand. "You saved my life today, Santos," he said. "I won't forget that." Maria watched the helicopter disappear into the distance and felt something change inside her. This wasn't a game or an exercise. People's lives depended on her decisions and actions. Captain Hayes noticed the change in Maria's demeanor after the ambush. She had arrived as an inexperienced soldier who seemed too young and small for combat. But combat had a way of revealing who people really were underneath the surface. Some soldiers cracked under the pressure, while others discovered reserves of courage and strength they never knew they possessed. "Santos," Hayes called her into his office a few days later. "I'm putting you in for a commendation for your actions during the convoy ambush. Rodriguez tells me you showed real leadership under fire." Maria stood at attention, still processing the events of recent weeks. When she had boarded the plane to Afghanistan, she thought she understood what deployment meant. Now she was learning that understanding and experiencing were completely different things. Every patrol brought new challenges and dangers that tested not just her military skills, but her character. As winter approached and the fighting season began to wind down, Maria reflected on how much had changed since her arrival. The shy recruit who had struggled through basic training was becoming a confident soldier who had earned the respect of her peers through courage and competence. But she also knew this was just the beginning. Afghanistan had many more lessons to teach her, and not all of them would be as forgiving as the ones she had learned so far. The spring of Maria's second deployment brought increased Taliban activity throughout the Kandahar province. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were planning a major offensive against coalition positions, and forward operating Base Falcon found itself at the center of the storm. Maria, now promoted to specialist, had become one of the most trusted members of Squad Charlie. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been reassigned to train new recruits, and his replacement was Sergeant First Class James Mitchell, a veteran of 3 previous deployments who had a reputation for aggressive tactics and zero tolerance for weakness. Mitchell looked at Maria with obvious skepticism during their first briefing. "I've read your file, Santos," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Says here you're some kind of hero. Well, I've seen plenty of soldiers who looked good on paper but couldn't handle the real deal. We'll see what you're made of soon enough." The test came sooner than expected. A week into Mitchell's command, Squad Charlie received orders to investigate reports of weapons smuggling in the village of Marja, a notorious Taliban stronghold that had been the site of fierce fighting in previous years. The mission was classified as high risk, with intelligence suggesting heavy enemy presence in the area. The squad moved out before dawn, using the cover of darkness to approach the village undetected. Maria was assigned as point guard, responsible for leading the patrol and watching for signs of ambush or improvised explosive devices. It was a position typically reserved for the most experienced soldiers, and she felt the weight of responsibility as she moved carefully through the pre-dawn gloom. As they entered the village outskirts, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. Maria's instincts, honed by months of combat experience, told her something was wrong. The usual sounds of early morning activity were absent. No roosters crowing, no women preparing breakfast, no children playing in the courtyards. She raised her fist to signal the squad to halt and spoke quietly into her radio. "Actual, this is Charlie Point. Village is empty. Recommend we abort and call for backup." But Mitchell's voice crackled back immediately. "Negative, Charlie Point. Mission continues as planned. Move forward." Maria felt her stomach clench with worry, but she followed orders and continued leading the patrol deeper into the village. They had made it 3 blocks when the first explosion shattered the morning silence. A roadside bomb detonated behind them, cutting off their retreat route and sending debris raining down from nearby buildings. Before Maria could react, machine gun fire erupted from multiple directions, and the squad found themselves trapped in a carefully planned ambush. "Contact front. Contact left." Voices shouted over the radio as Squad Charlie scrambled for cover. Maria dove behind a low wall as bullets whined overhead, her heart pounding as she tried to assess the situation. They were outnumbered and surrounded. Exactly the scenario every soldier dreaded. Mitchell's voice came over the radio, strained with tension. "Charlie 6 to all stations. We are taking heavy fire and need immediate support. Enemy strength estimated at 30 to 40 fighters." But Maria could see the nearest cover was at least 50 yards away, and moving would mean exposing themselves to devastating crossfire. That's when she noticed something that would change everything. To her right, partially hidden by rubble, was the entrance to what looked like an underground tunnel system. These tunnels were common in Afghan villages, often used for storing grain or as shelter during fighting. If she could reach it, she might be able to flank the enemy positions. Without waiting for orders, Maria sprinted toward the tunnel entrance as bullets cracked around her. She felt a sharp pain in her left arm as a round grazed her, but she kept moving until she tumbled through the narrow opening into darkness. Her arm was bleeding, but the wound wasn't serious enough to stop her. The tunnel was a maze of interconnected passages that ran beneath the village. Using her flashlight and compass, Maria navigated through the underground network, emerging behind the main Taliban position. What she saw made her blood run cold. Nearly 40 fighters had surrounded her squad and were preparing to overrun their positions. Maria knew she had only one chance. She pulled the pins from 2 fragmentation grenades and hurled them into the enemy concentration, then immediately opened fire with her rifle. The explosions created chaos in the Taliban ranks, and suddenly Squad Charlie had the advantage they needed. "This is Charlie Point," Maria radioed, breathing heavily. "I'm behind enemy lines, beginning flanking maneuver now." For the next 20 minutes, she moved through the village like a ghost, picking off enemy fighters and disrupting their coordinated attack. Her small size allowed her to use cover that larger soldiers couldn't access, and her marksmanship training paid off as she eliminated threats one by one. The turning point came when she reached a 2-story building that commanded the entire battlefield. Taliban snipers on the roof were pinning down her squad mates and preventing them from maneuvering to safety. Maria climbed through a window on the ground floor and made her way up a narrow staircase, her weapon ready. The rooftop confrontation was swift and deadly. 3 enemy snipers turned their weapons on her as she emerged from the stairway. But Maria's reflexes were faster. Her first shots took down 2 of the fighters, while the third managed to get off a round that shattered her helmet and left her ears ringing. She returned fire instantly, and the sniper crumpled. With the high ground secured, Maria was able to direct supporting fire for her trapped squad mates. Within minutes, Apache attack helicopters arrived on scene and finished destroying the remaining enemy positions. When the smoke cleared, Squad Charlie had suffered only minor casualties, while enemy losses were estimated at over 30 killed. Sergeant Mitchell found Maria on the rooftop, slumped against a wall with blood running down her face from the helmet impact. Her left arm was still bleeding from the earlier graze, and she looked exhausted, but her eyes were alert and focused. "Santos," Mitchell said, his voice filled with amazement. "What you did today, I've never seen anything like it. You saved all our lives." He knelt beside her as the medic began treating her wounds. "I owe you an apology. I underestimated you completely." The medical evacuation helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, but Maria refused to be transported to the hospital. "Just bandage me up, Doc," she told the medic. "My squad needs me." The wounds were superficial enough that she could continue serving, though the close call with the sniper's bullet had left her with a concussion. Word of Maria's heroic actions spread quickly throughout the base and then up the chain of command. Within a week, she was summoned to meet with Colonel Patricia Williams, the brigade commander. Williams was known as a tough, no-nonsense officer who had broken barriers as one of the first women to command a combat brigade. "Specialist Santos," Colonel Williams said as Maria stood at attention in her office. "Your actions in Marja were extraordinary. You showed initiative, courage, and tactical brilliance under the most difficult circumstances. I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star with V device for valor, and I'm also putting you in for immediate promotion to sergeant." Maria felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but Williams wasn't finished. "More than that, I want you to know that your actions have been noticed at the highest levels. There are people in Washington who are very interested in soldiers like you, people who can think on their feet and lead from the front when it matters most." As Maria left the colonel's office, she reflected on how much had changed since that first day in Afghanistan when Captain Hayes had told her to keep quiet and learn from the experienced soldiers. Now she was becoming one of those experienced soldiers, the one others looked to for leadership and guidance. But she also understood that each success came with a price. The weight of responsibility was growing heavier, and she knew that the enemy would be adapting their tactics as well. The war was far from over, and Maria Santos was just beginning to understand the true cost of the path she had chosen to walk. Sergeant Maria Santos stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside Forward Operating Base Falcon, preparing for what intelligence reports suggested would be the most dangerous mission of her military career. Taliban forces had captured a small Afghan National Army outpost 30 kilometers away, taking several soldiers prisoner and using the position to launch attacks on coalition supply routes. The mission was a joint operation involving multiple units, and Maria had been selected to lead a specialized reconnaissance team. Her squad now included soldiers from different companies, all volunteers who had specifically requested to serve under her command. Word of her tactical brilliance and courage under fire had spread throughout the base, and younger soldiers saw her as a role model. But Maria felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Among her team was Private First Class Jennifer Walsh, a 19-year-old from Iowa who reminded Maria of herself during basic training, small, determined, but still untested in real combat. There was also Corporal Marcus Johnson, a demolitions expert from Chicago whose steady hands and calm demeanor made him invaluable during high-stress situations. The mission plan was complex and dangerous. Maria's team would infiltrate the captured outpost under cover of darkness, gather intelligence on enemy strength and positions, then guide airstrikes and ground assault forces to retake the facility. If everything went according to plan, they would be extracted before the main attack began. If something went wrong, they would be trapped behind enemy lines with limited ammunition and no immediate support. Colonel Williams personally briefed Maria before the mission. "Santos, I'm not going to lie to you. This is extremely high risk. The Taliban has been preparing for our counterattack, and they've fortified the outpost with heavy weapons and experienced fighters. But your team is our best chance of minimizing casualties when we go in." Maria nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Success could save the lives of dozens of coalition soldiers. Failure could result in a catastrophic defeat that would embolden enemy forces throughout the region. The pressure was immense, but she had learned to channel that pressure into focused determination. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with Maria's team landing 2 kilometers from the target under a moonless sky. They moved through rocky terrain and scattered vegetation, using night vision equipment to navigate toward the captured outpost. The landscape was eerily quiet, broken only by the distant sound of generators and occasional radio chatter in Pashto. As they approached the facility, Maria could see why the Taliban had chosen to fortify this position. The outpost sat on high ground with excellent fields of fire in all directions. Multiple machine gun nests had been established along the perimeter, and she counted at least 50 enemy fighters moving between buildings. The intelligence reports had underestimated enemy strength by nearly 50%. Using hand signals to direct her team, Maria positioned them around the outpost perimeter to gather detailed intelligence. For 2 hours, they observed and documented enemy positions, weapon placements, and patrol patterns. The information they collected would be crucial for planning the assault, but Maria began to realize that a conventional attack would result in massive casualties. That's when she noticed something that changed everything. The Taliban fighters had been using the outpost's communication equipment to coordinate attacks throughout the region. If her team could infiltrate the command center and capture or destroy that equipment, they could deal a devastating blow to enemy operations beyond just retaking the outpost. But reaching the command center would require getting past numerous sentries and crossing open ground where they would be exposed to enemy fire. It was the kind of mission that would be considered almost suicidal under normal circumstances. Yet Maria knew this was exactly the kind of opportunity that could turn the tide of the entire campaign. She made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Instead of calling for immediate extraction as planned, Maria led her team closer to the outpost. Using a drainage culvert that ran beneath the facility's outer wall, they managed to penetrate the perimeter undetected. The tight confines of the culvert made movement slow and difficult, but their small team size became an advantage. They emerged inside the compound just after midnight, when most of the guards were focused on external threats. Maria divided her team into 2 groups. Johnson would plant explosive charges on the communications equipment while she and Walsh secured the command post. The plan required precise timing and no room for error. Everything went wrong at once. A Taliban sentry discovered Johnson placing charges on the radio equipment, and his shout of alarm echoed across the compound. Within seconds, the entire outpost erupted in chaos as dozens of fighters converged on their position. Maria found herself and Walsh trapped in a concrete building, surrounded by enemies who were determined to capture or kill them. The firefight that followed was unlike anything Maria had experienced. Enemy fighters attacked from multiple directions, using rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns to pin down her small team. Walsh was hit in the leg during the first few minutes of fighting, and Johnson was forced to take cover behind a disabled vehicle as bullets shattered windows and walls around him. For 3 hours, Maria's team held their position against overwhelming odds. She moved constantly through the building, firing from different windows to create the illusion of greater numbers while treating Walsh's wound and coordinating with Johnson over their radios. Her marksmanship skills proved crucial as she picked off enemy fighters attempting to storm their position. The situation became desperate when Taliban reinforcements arrived with mortars and began systematically destroying the building around them. Maria realized they had only minutes before their position became untenable. That's when she made the hardest decision of her military career. "Johnson," she radioed, "detonate the charges now and fall back to extraction point Alpha." She knew the explosion would destroy the communications equipment, but would also alert every enemy fighter in the area to their exact position. The explosion lit up the night sky and temporarily stunned the attacking forces, giving Maria the opening she needed. She threw Walsh over her shoulder in a fireman's carry and sprinted toward the outer wall, while Johnson provided covering fire. Bullets cracked around them as they reached the drainage culvert, and Maria felt a sharp impact in her back that sent her stumbling. She had been hit, but adrenaline kept her moving. The three of them crawled through the culvert as enemy fighters searched frantically for their escape route. By the time they emerged outside the perimeter, Maria was losing significant amounts of blood from the bullet wound in her back, but she refused to stop. The extraction helicopter found them 2 kilometers from the outpost, with Maria barely conscious, from blood loss and Walsh requiring immediate medical attention for her leg wound. Johnson had suffered minor injuries but was in good enough condition to help load his wounded teammates onto the aircraft. As the helicopter climbed away from the battlefield, Maria looked down at the burning communications center and felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. Her team had accomplished their mission and dealt a significant blow to enemy operations, but the cost had been severe. She would spend the next 6 weeks recovering from her wounds, and Walsh would require multiple surgeries to save her leg. The mission at the captured outpost became legendary within military circles. Maria's leadership under impossible circumstances and her team's courage against overwhelming odds earned recognition from the highest levels of command. She received the Silver Star for exceptional gallantry in action, becoming one of the youngest soldiers in decades to earn such a prestigious award. But for Maria, the real reward was simpler. Walsh eventually made a full recovery and went on to complete her deployment successfully. Johnson was promoted and selected for advanced training as an explosive ordnance disposal specialist. Both of them credited Maria's leadership with saving their lives and inspiring them to be better soldiers. As Maria prepared to return to duty after her recovery, she understood that she had crossed another threshold in her military career. She was no longer just a skilled soldier. She had become a proven combat leader who could be trusted with the most dangerous and important missions. But she also carried the scars, both physical and emotional, that came with that responsibility. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stepped off the transport aircraft at Bagram Airfield for her 4th deployment to Afghanistan, carrying scars from 3 previous tours and a reputation that had spread throughout the U.S. military. At 25, she had been promoted to senior non-commissioned officer rank and was now responsible for training new soldiers and leading complex multi-unit operations. The shy recruit who had once struggled through basic training had become one of the most respected combat leaders in the Army. The war in Afghanistan was winding down, but enemy forces were launching increasingly desperate attacks in an attempt to claim victory before coalition forces withdrew. Maria's new assignment was to lead a specialized task force responsible for securing key infrastructure and supporting the transition of security responsibilities to Afghan National Army units. It was supposed to be a relatively safe assignment compared to her previous combat roles. The task force included soldiers from multiple branches of service: Army infantry, Marines, Navy construction engineers, and Air Force combat controllers. Managing such a diverse group required diplomatic skills that Maria had developed over years of combat leadership. She had learned that effective leadership wasn't about being the toughest or loudest person in the room, but about earning respect through competence and caring for the welfare of her people. Her second-in-command was Gunnery Sergeant Rebecca Martinez, a Marine veteran with 15 years of service who had initially been skeptical about serving under an Army sergeant. But Maria's reputation had preceded her, and Martinez quickly learned to appreciate her tactical brilliance and genuine concern for her troops. "Santos," Martinez said during their first planning session, "I've heard stories about you, but I wasn't sure if they were real or just military legend. After reading your file, I'm convinced you walk on water." Maria laughed, but her expression grew serious. "Those stories came with a cost, Gunny. Every medal I've earned represents someone who got hurt or worse. My job now is to make sure we complete our missions without adding to that count." The first major test of Maria's leadership came when her task force was assigned to secure the Kamal Khan Dam, a critical piece of infrastructure that provided electricity and irrigation water to hundreds of thousands of Afghan civilians. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces were planning to destroy the dam as a symbolic victory before coalition forces withdrew from the region. The dam was located in a remote valley surrounded by mountains that provided perfect positions for enemy observation and attack. Maria's task force would need to establish a defensive perimeter around the facility while Afghan National Army engineers inspected and repaired critical systems. The mission was expected to last 2 weeks, but Maria's instincts told her they should prepare for a much longer and more dangerous assignment. Her concerns proved justified when the task force arrived at the dam and discovered that the facility had been infiltrated by Taliban sympathizers who had been systematically sabotaging equipment for months. Critical control systems had been damaged and the structural integrity of the dam itself was questionable. What should have been a routine security operation became a race against time to prevent both military defeat and humanitarian disaster. Maria established defensive positions on the high ground, surrounding the dam, while her engineers worked around the clock to assess and repair the damage. She implemented patrol schedules that kept constant surveillance on likely enemy approach routes, and she personally led reconnaissance missions to gather intelligence on Taliban forces gathering in the area. The attack, when it came, was the most coordinated and sophisticated assault Maria had ever faced. Taliban commanders had spent months planning the operation, bringing together fighters from across the region and positioning heavy weapons in prepared positions throughout the mountains. They intended to destroy both the dam and the American task force defending it. The assault began with a massive mortar barrage that targeted the command post and communications equipment. Maria was thrown to the ground by the first explosion, feeling shrapnel tear through her helmet and cut her scalp. Blood ran down her face as she struggled to regain her footing and assess the damage to her defensive positions. All stations. This is Guardian 6, she radioed, using the tactical call sign for her unit. We are under heavy attack from multiple directions. Enemy strength estimated at company level or higher. Request immediate air support and reinforcement. But the response crackled back with devastating news. A major Taliban offensive was underway across the entire region, and no reinforcements or air support would be available for at least 12 hours. Maria's task force of 60 soldiers was alone against an enemy force that outnumbered them at least 3-1. For 18 hours, the Battle of Kamal Khan Dam raged across the mountainous terrain. Maria moved constantly between defensive positions, coordinating fires, treating wounded soldiers, and making tactical decisions that would determine whether her people lived or died. Enemy fighters launched wave after wave of attacks, probing for weaknesses in the American defensive line. The turning point came when Taliban forces managed to infiltrate the dam facility itself, using underground maintenance tunnels that had been overlooked during the initial security sweep. A dozen enemy fighters emerged inside the perimeter and began placing explosive charges on the dam's main structure while engaging Maria's soldiers in close-quarters combat. Maria led a counterattack into the dam's interior, fighting through narrow corridors and machinery spaces where her small size became a crucial advantage. She moved like a shadow through the complex, engaging enemy fighters at point-blank range, while her team worked to defuse the explosive charges. The fighting inside the dam was brutal and personal. Maria found herself face-to-face with a Taliban commander who had been directing the infiltration. The two fought with knives and bare hands in a control room filled with critical equipment, each knowing that the outcome of their personal battle could determine the fate of hundreds of thousands of civilians who depended on the dam. Maria's combat experience and training gave her the edge she needed. She managed to subdue the enemy commander and secure the detonator for the explosive charges, but not before taking a knife wound to her shoulder that would leave her right arm partially disabled for the remainder of the battle. With the immediate threat to the dam neutralized, Maria refocused on the larger battle raging outside. Her defensive positions were under enormous pressure, and she could see that several of her soldiers had been wounded. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez had taken shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade and was commanding her section with a field dressing, covering half her face. "Martinez, what's our ammunition status?" Maria asked over the radio as she moved between positions, her wounded arm hanging useless at her side. "Running low on everything, Staff Sergeant," Martinez replied through gritted teeth. "We've got maybe 2 hours of sustained fighting left before we start throwing rocks." That's when Maria made the decision that would define her legacy. Instead of waiting for the inevitable final assault, she gathered her squad leaders for a desperate plan. They would launch their own attack against the main enemy positions, using the element of surprise to disrupt Taliban coordination and buy time for reinforcements to arrive. "I know this sounds crazy," she told her leaders as explosions echoed around them. "But sitting here waiting to be overrun isn't working. We hit them hard and fast, create confusion in their ranks, then fall back to secondary positions. It's risky, but it's better than dying slowly." The counterattack that followed became known in military history as one of the most audacious small unit actions of the entire war. Maria led 30 soldiers in a frontal assault against entrenched enemy positions using speed and aggression to overcome superior numbers. Her tactical brilliance and personal courage inspired her troops to achieve what should have been impossible. Fighting with one arm effectively useless, Maria moved through the battlefield like an avenging angel, directing her soldiers and engaging targets with deadly accuracy. She personally destroyed 2 machine gun positions and coordinated the assault that overran the main Taliban command post. The enemy, caught completely off guard by the unexpected attack, began to withdraw in confusion. But victory came at a terrible price. Maria had been hit again during the assault, this time by fragments from a hand grenade that tore through her back and legs. She collapsed just as Apache attack helicopters finally arrived on scene to provide the support her task force had desperately needed. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez found Maria lying behind the captured enemy position, barely conscious, but still clutching her radio and trying to coordinate the defense of the dam. Blood pooled beneath her, and Martinez could see multiple wounds that needed immediate medical attention. "Santos, stay with me," Martinez said, applying pressure to the worst of the wounds. "Medic, I need a medic over here now." Maria looked up at her second-in-command with eyes that were beginning to glaze over from blood loss and shock. "Did we hold it?" she whispered. "Did we save the dam?" "Yeah, Staff Sergeant," Martinez replied, tears mixing with the dirt and blood on her face. "We held it. The dam is secure and the Taliban is running. You did it." The medical T. Master Sergeant Maria Santos walked slowly across the stage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., her dress blue uniform bearing ribbons that told the story of one of the most decorated careers in modern military history. The audience of military leaders, politicians, and dignitaries rose to their feet as she approached the podium, where the President of the United States waited, with a small blue box containing the Medal of Honor. 5 years had passed since the Almuri Battle of Kamal Khan Dam, and Maria's body still bore the scars of her combat service. She walked with a slight limp from her leg wounds, and her right arm had limited mobility from the knife attack in the dam's control room. But her eyes held the same determination that had carried her through 4 combat deployments and countless life-or-death decisions. The ceremony was the culmination of a journey that had taken Maria from the intensive care unit in Germany to the halls of the Pentagon, where she had spent 3 years helping to reshape military doctrine based on the lessons learned from her combat experiences. Her insights into small unit tactics, leadership under extreme pressure, and the integration of diverse forces had influenced training programs throughout the military. As the President placed the Medal of Honor around her neck, Maria thought about all the people who had made this moment possible. Her parents, who had driven from Los Angeles to witness their daughter receive the nation's highest military decoration. Her former squad mates, many of whom were in the audience despite their own busy military careers. The soldiers who had served under her command and learned that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about doing the right thing despite being afraid. "Master Sergeant Santos," the President said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "represents the very best of American military leadership. Her actions in combat saved countless lives and demonstrated that heroism comes in many forms. Today we honor not just her individual courage, but the example she has set for future generations of soldiers." The citation read aloud during the ceremony detailed Maria's actions during the Battle of Kamal Khan Dam, but it could only hint at the complete story of her transformation from an inexperienced recruit to a legendary combat leader. The 5 Purple Hearts on her uniform, earned during different engagements across 4 deployments, told their own story of sacrifice and dedication to duty. After the formal ceremony, Maria found herself surrounded by young soldiers who had requested permission to meet her. They came from all branches of service, many of them women who saw in Maria proof that gender was no barrier to military excellence. But Maria was always quick to redirect their attention from her individual achievements to the broader lessons of leadership and teamwork. "The thing you have to understand," she told a group of junior officers during the reception, "is that I never accomplished anything alone. Every medal I wear represents the collective efforts of amazing soldiers who trusted me with their lives. The real heroes are the ones who didn't make it home, and the ones who came back broken but never stopped serving." Among the audience was Jessica Chen, now Lieutenant Colonel Chen, who had flown in from her assignment in South Korea to attend the ceremony. The two women had maintained their friendship throughout their careers, and Jessica had followed Maria's example by pursuing her own path to combat leadership. "Do you remember that night in basic training when you found me crying?" Maria asked as they stood together during the reception. Jessica laughed and nodded. "You looked like you were ready to quit and go home to Mama. I never imagined that scared. Little recruit would become the most decorated soldier of our generation." "We all start somewhere," Maria replied. "The important thing is that we don't let fear stop us from becoming who we're meant to be." Maria's post-combat career had taken her to the Army War College, where she earned a master's degree in strategic studies while developing new approaches to training combat leaders. Her thesis on adaptive leadership in extreme environments became required reading for officers throughout the military. She had also served as an advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, providing input on everything from equipment design to rules of engagement. But perhaps her most important role was as a mentor to young soldiers who saw in her story proof that anyone could rise to greatness if they were willing to pay the price. Maria received hundreds of letters from soldiers around the world, thanking her for showing them that courage wasn't about being the biggest or strongest, but about refusing to give up when others were counting on you. The transition from combat to peacetime service hadn't been easy. Maria struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why she had lived when so many good soldiers had died. She dealt with chronic pain from her injuries and the psychological effects of years spent in life or death situations. Like many combat veterans, she found it difficult to relate to people who had never experienced the intensity and clarity that came with combat. But Maria had found purpose in sharing her experiences and helping to prepare the next generation of military leaders. She spoke at military academies, conducted leadership seminars, and worked with researchers studying the psychological and physiological effects of combat on soldiers. Her goal was to ensure that future warriors would be better prepared for the challenges they would face. Standing in the Kennedy Center that evening, surrounded by people who had played roles in her remarkable journey, Maria reflected on how much had changed since that first day at Fort Benning, when she had been dismissed as too small and inexperienced for military service. The girl who had once struggled to complete a single pull-up had become a symbol of American military excellence recognized around the world. The Medal of Honor ceremony was broadcast live to military bases throughout the world, where soldiers gathered to watch one of their own receive the highest recognition their country could bestow. In Afghanistan, at the forward operating base where Maria had begun her transformation from recruit to warrior, soldiers cheered as they watched their former leader receive the honor she had earned through blood and sacrifice. As the evening wound down and the dignitaries began to leave, Maria found herself alone for a moment with General Williams, who had been promoted to Army Chief of Staff. The two women had developed a close professional relationship over the years, and Williams had been instrumental in ensuring that Maria's contributions were properly recognized. "So what's next, Maria?" Williams asked. "You've got your choice of assignments now. Teaching at West Point, commanding a training brigade, maybe even a Pentagon job working on future force structure." Maria smiled and looked out at the Washington skyline through the Kennedy Center's glass walls. "I think I'd like to go back to where it all started, General. There are young soldiers out there right now who look just like I did 15 years ago. Scared, inexperienced, wondering if they have what it takes. Maybe I can help them discover what I learned." "That courage isn't something you're born with," Williams said, completing Maria's thought. "It's something you develop through facing your fears and refusing to quit." "Exactly," Maria replied. "Every soldier has the potential to be a hero. Sometimes they just need someone to show them the way." As Maria Santos prepared to begin the next chapter of her military career, She carried with her the knowledge that she had already achieved something far greater than individual recognition. She had proven that heroism wasn't about fitting a particular image or meeting specific physical requirements. It was about heart, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than oneself. The shy recruit from East Los Angeles, who had once seemed too inexperienced for military service, had become a legend whose story would inspire soldiers for generations to come. But Maria knew that her greatest achievement wasn't the medals on her uniform or the recognition she had received. It was the lives she had saved, the soldiers she had mentored, and the example she had set that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to accept limitations others placed on them. Her journey from inexperienced recruit to Medal of Honor recipient was complete, but Maria Santos understood that the most important part of her mission, inspiring and training the next generation of American warriors, was just beginning.